Rhett Lawson bought the old mountain cabin without seeing it first because the price was low, the bank was close to taking his ranch, and the land officer swore the place was empty. So on the first clear morning after the sale, he rode up the pine trail thinking about roofs, fences, and how one small cabin might save everything he owned. And he never once imagined that someone was already living there or that his dead wife had tied his name to that cabin years before she died. The ride was quiet except for the creak of leather and the dull thud of his horse's hooves on the dry ground. And Rhett kept counting in his head how many cows he might sell, how many rooms he could rent, how much money he might pull in before winter, and every number came up short. But the cabin still felt like a last small rope to grab when you were already halfway down the well. He saw a thin line of smoke before he saw the roof, a gray finger curling up through the trees, and his stomach tightened, because smoke meant someone was cooking inside a place that was supposed to be empty, and trouble was the last thing he could afford. Yet trouble never cared what a man could pay. He slowed his horse and slid his hand to the worn grip of his revolver as the cabin came into view, a solid log house with a small porch and a rough door. Better than he had hoped for the low price, and the sight of smoke slipping from the stone chimney made his jaw clench. He swung out of the saddle, tied his horse to the post, and called, "Cabin's under new owner. Whoever's inside, come on out so we can talk," trying to sound calm and in charge even though his heart was drumming hard against his ribs. For a long second, nothing moved. Then the door opened just a crack and a woman's voice came from the dim space behind it, tight and steady at the same time. "Say your name first." The demand surprised him more than a gunshot would have. He frowned and answered, "Rhett Lawson." And before he could say more, the door flew open wider and a young woman stepped out with a rifle already at her shoulder. The barrel pointed straight at his chest, her brown dress wrinkled but clean, her hazel eyes bright with anger and fear. "Back away from this porch," she said. "Now." Rhett lifted both hands, palms open, and took one slow step back, feeling the hot afternoon air on his face and the cold circle of the gun on his chest at the same time. "I don't want trouble," he said. "I paid for this place yesterday at the land office. I've got the bill of sale in my stallback. The clerk told me it was empty." She gave a harsh laugh that did not reach her eyes. "Of course he did," she replied. "Men like Silas Crane and Marshal Webb don't like to say out loud what they stole." Hearing Silas's name was like biting down on a stone. Rhett's jaw locked. Silas Crane was the richest cattleman in the valley, the same man who owned Rhett's ranch note and had tried twice to buy his land for half of what it was worth, smiling like they were good neighbors while he slowly tightened the rope. "You know Silas?" Rhett asked. "He owns everything wrong with this county," she answered. "Name's Ada Finch. This was my father Jacob's cabin. When he died, Silas and the marshal took it with papers they made up in town. They told me I could stay a while if I kept quiet. They never said they planned to sell it to you, too." Before Rhett could respond, a small head popped up behind her skate, a little boy with tangled curly hair clutching a wooden toy horse, big green eyes peeking at Rhett with open worry. "Mama, is he the man from the letters?" the boy asked. The word letters echoed in Rhett's mind like a bell in a church. "What letters?" he asked slowly. Ada kept the rifle up but tilted her head toward the inside of the cabin. "Come in," she said, voice softer but still wary. "If Silas picked you, it means you're already in danger. You might as well know the whole of it." Inside, the cabin was small but neat, with an iron stove, a narrow bed, a trunk at the foot of it, and shelves lined with jars and old books that showed someone had loved this place for a long time. Ada shut the door and lowered the rifle, though she kept it close to hand. The boy climbed up onto the bed with his toy horse and watched Rhett with curious eyes. Ada walked to the trunk, lifted the lid, and pulled out a worn envelope. "My father Jacob was not a stranger to you," she said quietly. "He was kin to your wife." The world seemed to tilt. "My wife's dead," Rhett said, trying not to hear the ache in his own voice. "She never mentioned a Jacob Finch." Ada held out the envelope. "Her name was Lila," she said. "She wrote to my father for years." His breath caught when he saw the writing on the front of the envelope, the K-full slant, the way she made the L in her name. He had seen that hand on grocery lists, on little notes she would leave in his coat pocket, and the sight of it now felt like fingers closing around his heart. Ada went on. "Before she married you, She was taken in by my father's family for a time. Her mother was his cousin. There was not enough food for all the children, and my father took one of the girls up here to raise. He told me I had an older sister somewhere, a girl with a laugh like sunlight who ended up with other kin and later married a quiet rancher named Lawson. He did not say more because it hurt him to talk about the day the family split. But he and Lila wrote letters. She called him her second father. Rhett's hand shook as he opened the envelope. The letter inside was old, but the ink was still dark. Lila's voice came back to him from the neat lines. She thanked Jacob for taking care of the little one. She spoke of Rhett's pride and stubbornness, of the way he would work himself to dust rather than ask for help. And then she wrote, "If anything happens to me and Rhett is ever in trouble, please give him a place on your land, somewhere he can stand and not be pushed by men with more money than mercy." Near the bottom another line made his throat close. "And if my sister is with you, tell her I never forgot her, and that I am trying to build a life strong enough for us all." He stayed at those last words, barely able to breathe. "Why didn't she tell me?" he whispered. Ada shook her head. "Maybe she meant to when there was more time," she said gently. "But sickness comes fast." Rhett closed his eyes for a second, seeing Lila in the last days of her fever, calling his name, gripping his hand, and he felt again the helpless rage of not being able to save her. When he opened his eyes, Ada was watching him. "After my father died," she continued, "Silas came with the marshal. They waved papers my father never signed. I argued. They laughed. The marshal said the law was clear and that if I made noise they would throw me and my boy out in the snow. Then Silas found Lila's last letter in the trunk. He read about you and smiled like a fox. A few weeks later he sold this place cheap to you. You don't need a map to see the trap." Rhett folded the letter and put it safely in his shirt pocket, over his heart. His fear for his ranch warred with a hot rush of anger. "Silas wants me here so he can claim I broke some rule and take my land," he said. "And he wants you gone so no one hears how he stole from your father." Ada nodded. "He thinks he owns the judge and the bank. He thinks there's no one left to stop him." The little boy on the bed spoke up again. "Mama says we have to be brave," he told Rhett. "Are you brave?" Rhett looked at the child, at Ada's tired face, at the small cabin that his wife had somehow tied to his name from beyond the grave, and he heard Lila's voice in his memory saying, "Don't turn hard when I'm gone, Rhett. If someone needs you, don't look away." He swallowed. "My name's Tommy," the boy said, patting the toy horse. "What's your horse's name?" The simple question broke something open in Rhett. "His name's Ranger," he answered. "And I don't know if I'm brave, Tommy, but I know I'm mad enough to try." He turned back to Ada. "We need proof," he said. "Real proof. Ledgers. Records. Something bigger than one letter. If we can show a judge outside this valley what Silas and the marshal did, they can't hide behind small-town talk." Ada told him the land office kept thick books of sales and debts, that Silas and Marshall would often close the door at the end of the day and stayed late, laughing as they pored over papers. Rhett decided fast. "Bar the door behind me," he told her. "If I'm not back by dark, take Tommy and head into the trees. Follow the creek north. It leads to my ranch. My foreman will help you." Tommy hopped off the bed and ran over, thrusting the toy horse toward Rhett. "Take him," the boy insisted. "He's lucky." Rhett's big hand closed gently around the little carving. "No," he said, feeling his throat tighten. "You keep him. I'll borrow some of his luck." He rode down to town with the sun high and hot on his back and a knot of fear in his gut, but every clop of Ranger's hooves beat out the same thought. Lila asked Jacob to help me, and Jacob is gone, so now it's on me. At the land office the clerk blinked in surprise when Rhett walked in so soon after the sale. "Forgot to check one thing in the ledger," Rhett said, forcing an easy tone. "Mind if I look?" The clerk, who liked Silas's money, hesitated but handed over the big key and stepped into the back room to fetch a bundle of forms. Rhett used the moment to slip behind the counter, open the heavy book, and flip pages until he found Jacob Finch's lot number. There, in cramped ink, was Jacob's name. On the next line, barely a week after the date of death the doctor had written on the certificate, the same land passed to Silas through debt settlement. Below that, another line showed the sale to Rhett, all signed by Marshal Webb. The ink on the last two lines was fresher, darker, and the TS in Webb's name did not match his oldest signatures in the book. It looked wrong even to Rhett's untrained eye. He heard footsteps returning and made a choice so fast he did not have time to doubt it. He tore the whole page out, folded it once, stuffed it under his shirt, and closed the ledger just as the clerk reappeared. "See what you needed?" the man asked, eyes narrowing as he noticed the torn edge. "Yeah," Rhett said, forcing a smile. "Looks like I got a good deal after all." On the street outside, the smile vanished when he saw Silas Crane leaning against a post in front of the saloon, dressed in his dark coat, boots polished, hat low over his cold eyes. Marshal Webb stood beside him, thumbs hooked in his belt like he owned the world. "Heard you went up to see your new place," Silas called. "Hope you like surprises." Rhett did not answer. If they suspected he knew about Ada or the letter, they showed nothing on their faces, but he had the prickling sense of being watched by snakes. He rode out of town by a side road, then cut across gullies and dry creek beds, pushing Ranger hard to get back to the cabin by a different route. Even so, when he reached the clearing he was too late. 4 horses already waited in the yard. Silas, Webb, and 2 hired riders sat their saddles facing the porch, where Ada stood with Tommy behind her, the rifle resting barrel down by her side as if she had just lowered it. Rhett's stomach dropped. He slowed and forced himself to ride in like a man who had nothing to hide. "Afternoon," he said. The marshal turned his head. "Rhett Lawson," Webb called in a loud, firm voice. "You under suspicion of stealing county records and harboring an unlawful squatter. Step down here where I can see your hands." Tommy clung to Ada's dress, eyes wide. Rhett slid from the saddle, one hand spread, the other close to his shirt where the torn page lay, and said, "I didn't steal anything that wasn't already stolen, but I did bring something you all might want to see." He pulled out the folded sheet and held it high. "Recognize this, Marshal?" he asked. Webb's eyes flashed from the paper to Silas, then back. "That's government property," he snapped. "Tearing pages from a land ledger is a crime. Hand it over." "Oh, I will," Rhett said, stepping away from his horse so everyone could see the names. "I'll hand it over to a judge who doesn't drink in your saloon. It shows Jacob Finch's land passing to Silas days after Jacob died and then to me. It shows your signature changing when Silas needed it to. It shows both of you robbed a dead man's daughter and tried to use me to cover it." One of Silas's riders shifted uneasily. "Jacob was buried that week," the man muttered. "I remember. I hauled lumber for his coffin." Another rider, younger, glanced at Webb's badge and then at Ada and Tommy on the porch and clearly did not like what he was seeing. Silas's jaw tightened. "You think you can stir up doubts with one scrap of paper?" he sneered. "I own the debts on half these men's homes. They know which side their bread is on." Before Rhett could answer, the sound of more hoofbeats rolled through the trees, heavy and fast. Every head turned as 3 new riders burst into the clearing, dust swirling around them. The lead rider wore a plain black coat and a polished star on his vest, not the local tin, but the deep gleam of a state badge. "Nobody move," he called, reining his horse between the cabin and the gathered men, his 2 deputies spreading out to either side with level rifles. "Name's Harlan Price, State Marshal. I'm here about some interesting land deals and a very nervous clerk who wired my office this morning." Webb blanched. Silas swore under his breath. Price turned to Rhett. "You must be Lawson," he said. "The clerk claimed you stormed in and ripped a page right out of his book." Rhett held out the paper. "I tore the truth out before they could burn it," he said. "Jacob Finch was kin to my late wife. Silas and Webb stole his land and tried to use me to finish the theft." Price studied the paper, comparing the signatures and dates with a practiced eye, then looked up at Ada. "You Jacob's girl?" he asked. Ada nodded, chin high. "Yes, sir," she answered. "Ada Finch. This is my boy, Tommy." Silas and the marshal told me the law said I was nothing but a problem in their way. Price's face hardened. "Law's not a hammer for rich men," he said. "Not while I wear this star." He faced Silas and Webb. "You'll both ride back to town with me for a full hearing before the circuit judge. If your hands are clean, you've got nothing to fear." Silas started to protest, then snapped and yanked his gun, thinking if he could kill Rhett and Ada and claim they resisted, the mess might vanish. But Webb, shaken by the sight of Tommy on the porch and maybe by the weight of his own lies, grabbed Silas's arm at the same time, jerking the barrel upward so the shot went into the air. Price's deputy moved like lightning, knocking Silas from the saddle and jamming a rifle against his back while the other deputy twisted Webb's hands behind him and clapped irons on his wrists. The men watching let out low curses and pulled their horses back. Nobody wanted to get caught between state guns and local cheats. "Why help me now?" Rhett asked Webb quietly as Price bound Silas's wrists as well. Webb's shoulders sagged. "Because I got tired of waking up every morning hoping Jacob Finch's ghost wouldn't show up at my door," he muttered. "And because that boy on the porch looks like my grandson." Within days, Silas and Webb were hauled before a judge in the capital. Rhett, Ada, and Tommy traveled by wagon, Lila's letter and the torn ledger page locked in a box under Ada's feet. In the high-ceiling courtroom, the judge listened to the land clerk's shaky confession, to Webb's broken statement, to Ada's simple story of grief and loss, and to Rhett reading Lila's letter aloud, his voice rough but steady as he spoke her words about pride, fear, and the hope that strangers could become family. When it was done, the judge pushed his glasses up his nose and said, "Silas Crane and Marshal Webb abused their power and forged records for their own gain. This court returns the cabin and surrounding land to Ada Finch and cancels the mortgage note on the Lawson Ranch, which was used as leverage in this fraud." The weight that fell off Rhett's shoulders was so great he had to grip the bench to stay standing. Outside, on the courthouse steps, while the prisoners were led away and the townsfolk began to talk about how they always knew something was wrong, Rhett turned to Ada. "You have your home back," he said. "You and Tommy can stay there in peace now. My ranch is safe again. Lila's favor has been repaid." Ada shook her head slowly. "You think that's all she was doing?" she asked. "Saving land." She pulled another envelope from her pocket, one Price had found tucked inside Jacob's trunk when they searched for records, and pressed it into Rhett's hand. On the front, in Lila's neat writing, were the words to the sister I never got to meet. Ada's voice shook as she said, "My father never found the courage to give this to me. He hid it away. The marshal found it and handed it over, maybe to clear a piece of his soul." Rhett opened it and read Lila's simple, aching lines, written years before. How their mother had been forced to give one girl to Jacob and one to other kin. How Lila had never stopped wondering about the baby left in Jacob's arms. How she dreamed that one day her children and her sister's children would run together on the same land. When he finished, he looked up, eyes burning, and saw the truth already shining on Ada's face. "You're her," he whispered. "You're Lila's lost sister." Tommy tugged his sleeve. "Does that make you my uncle?" the boy asked, blinking. Rhett let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "Yeah, kid," he said, dropping to one knee so he could look Tommy in the eye. "Looks like it does." The cabin he had bought to save his ranch had given him something else Lila had wanted for him all along, a family he never knew he had. Weeks later, back on the porch as the sun went down and cattle grazed safely on land no one could steal anymore, Rhett watched Ada lay Jacob's old quilt over Tommy as the boy slept in a bed that now belonged fully to him. And he knew the real surprise inside the cabin had not been a stranger with a gun, but his sister-in-law Lila had placed in his path years before she died, and the quiet, fierce little family that was slowly stitching itself together out of broken pieces, all because one woman had believed that mercy and trust could reach farther than money or fear.